Environmental Affairs Minister Edna Molewa joins us in studio. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us here at 8 and 7.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Lepo.
Now, I'm going to start with my first question to you about the recent drastic changes experienced globally. The rains are breaking 100 years record, and the countries across the world are experiencing a high temperature, again breaking all records. And can we say that the world is facing a major global challenge?
Yes, indeed. We are really facing a serious challenge as the world. And that phenomenon that you have just described is actually known as climate change. You know, people talk about global warming. As the globe warms up, then we experience all these very strange events. And here in South Africa, let's just start by taking it from home. Here in South Africa, we're beginning to see the west becoming much more drier, with vegetation obviously going, and the east becoming much more wetter. We know that recently we have had situations where you had snow in Eastern Cape, where we never actually had snow throughout our lifetime and the lifetime of our gogos. So it is indeed changing. The soil is becoming much more difficult to actually plant, and the planting seasons have actually changed. So we are hard hit by global change. It's not only South Africa. The African continent is much more vulnerable. And it is for that reason that, as the African continent, we have been arguing that indeed it is necessary that we focus on adaptation. Because if we chase mitigation alone, by the time we really wake up, it could be late that we are now just requiring to adapt all the time. Adaptation meaning that changing methods of irrigation, agricultural practices, buildings and so forth, construction of our own houses, etc., etc. So that is very, very necessary. But as a world, we need to act together, because you can't just act as South Africa. It is for that reason that we have been negotiating this agreement that we finally found one another as parties of the world in November, December last year. The famous Paris deal, which we now are implementing as parties of the world. These are all intended to ensure that the world environment becomes really resourceful for our people, because as you rightfully say, on the World Environment Day, as we do, we are sensitizing our people that without these natural resources, there will be no life at all, because these are your municipal services of nature, if you like. Without these services, you can't have life, you can't have food, you can't have healthy people, you can't have health itself, because some of the products, if not all of them, are actually found from the plants as medicines and so forth. So they really come from natural resources.
Now, looking at South Africa, we have faced the worst drought, of course, and it has adversely affected as well as the economy, with millions facing the wrath of the weather.
Yes, indeed. South Africa is naturally, under normal circumstances, we are the 30th driest country of the world. Given the fact that we also never quite get snow. You know, countries of the north, in particular, those that are much more towards, Europe, Paris above there, they do have snow, and that is a way of recharging their aquifers. We have only Lesotho here that we rely on, which has got high mountains that sometimes actually, at all times except last year, it wasn't really very high snow situation that they realized. So those are being recharged, the aquifers are being recharged through the snow. We are the dry country. We situated at a place, much more southern hemisphere, much more like Australia. So we have much more the same rainfall pattern. But things have actually been weighed worse by a natural phenomenon, which is called El Nino. Now, El Nino of this year has actually hit us hard. Those who are scientists and who know better than I do tell us that it's many hundreds of years ago, then around the 1920s, that we had a situation like this. And it has now come as a cycle because it's cyclical. It has become as bad as it was around the 20s. So that has actually made things worse in South Africa. And it is for that reason that we now are saying, let's really work together and much harder to firstly adapt, change our way of doing things, ensure that we use water sparingly, ensure that we use our natural resources sparingly, Because, for instance, if you just look at water and see a place where you can just litter, throw in plastics, throw in all sorts of your metals, all sorts of your insecticides, pesticides, and so forth, you'll actually cause the fact that we are facing, face serious challenges. Right now, as we speak, the scientists who have come out of the oceans now, who are researching continuously, are telling us that for the past 2 years, they find what is called the plastic smaller one. They have a name for it. The small plastics that actually come from inland that are beginning to be more and more in the ocean, leading to marine life being in danger. And therefore, we may not have fish, we may not have aquaculture adequate enough for us to live. And that on its own warms the ocean, because the warming that we are beginning to experience now, not beginning, that we've been experiencing pre-industrial, post-industrialization, actually is warming that comes from the human-induced activities, like the ones that I'm talking about right now.
Now, you also touched on adaptation as well as working together, and the worst affected are the poor and as well as the farming community. What steps need to be taken to lessen the effects of the climate change on them?
Let me just say that it is indeed unfortunate that every time when there is an impact that is from a natural phenomenon like this one, it affects mainly the poorest of the poor. Whether it becomes too cold, whether we experience floods, whether we experience snow, those who are vulnerable, whether we actually have food shortages, those who are experiencing and feeling these challenges more are the poorest of the poor, because sometimes they can't have food, sometimes they don't have shelter adequate, they don't have heating up systems, and so forth and so forth. So these are the people who are most vulnerable. What are we doing as government? We have a program, not only as government, by the way, with our people out there. We have programs that are intended to ensure that we adapt to the situations and conditions. And in this regard, we have programs like, for instance, your cities program, the greener cities development. And it's only, by the way, not only cities, but even small towns, where we ensure that there's development of your new green developments, like adapting to buildings, ensuring that the houses that are being built for people must be made with material that is actually protecting them against the cold, and they use lesser electricity, we save energy, they are installed in such a manner that there'll be lesser usage of water, solar heating systems that are installed, and so forth and so forth. So there are measures of that nature that are around human development and human settlements that are also intended to help the poor in particular, over and above us acting in our own right as a citizen of the world in ensuring that we do indeed the implementation of our measures that we agreed to do, or that of reducing the carbon emission reduction. Because if you use lesser energy, amongst others, you will be using lesser coal, lesser resources, and therefore contributing to carbon emission reduction. So we are adapting in that regard. But the second area is, this is within the human space, human settlement and human development space. Within the farming community space, there are also mechanisms that the plan exists already. By the way, each one of these sectors has got a sectoral plan, where the agricultural sector has now begun actually using different methods of planting, different methods of irrigating, different seeds. We also have a drought-resistant seed that was manufactured here in South Africa, actually established in South Africa through CSIR. Our scientists have established that it is through maize production. Already Kenya is using that drought resistance seed. We are beginning to use those kinds of seeds so that we can actually have shorter time of plowing and planting and harvesting, also using less water that compared to previously. So I'm just giving one of the examples of within the farming community, the agricultural sector, the adaptation plan. We have adaptation plan within land use. We have adaptation plan also within the energy space. So there are different sectors, different sectoral plans of adaptation that are under implementation. And all these actually begin by focusing first on the previously disadvantaged, the poorest of the poor, so that they get helped to actually live through these difficult situations that we face.
All right, now shifting to the theme that you're running with in 2016, let's talk about the dangers that are posed by poaching the rhino, which is one of the most targeted animal, of course, in South Africa.
Rhino being the most targeted animal. Let me speak about any other animal, by the way. Okay. And in this instance, I would like to say that we would like to protect all our species equally, including the rhino, including the flora aspect of our natural resources. You have rightfully said earlier on and indicated that our cycads are beginning to near extinction. We do now have a plan in place. When I say a plan, because for us to determine that a species like cycad, I'm starting with cycad, I'll go to rhino. A species like cycad is nearing extinction. We do studies all the time, monitoring of each and every species of our fauna and flora in South Africa, whether they're plant or they're animals. We do counts, we do monitoring of where they are traded and what they are used for, and so forth and so forth. So with the cycad, we have actually got to know that the wild cycad in particular has actually become extinct. So the plan says the following, amongst others, that it is prohibited to be traded with internationally. You may not be able to sell certain size, length of some of the species to one another. You require a permit to plant and to move it. And so you are able to monitor its growth and its multiplication, because we have to ensure that that happens. Coming back to, and we do that with all our flora as well, all our other plants that are almost nearing extinction. We do put such plans in place, but otherwise people can actually use the natural resources in a sustainable manner, of course. Coming to rhino, we do have rhino that's actually the highest population throughout the world. South Africa is #1 of our rhino population, up to 21,000, 22,000, just over 21,000. When you have the #2, the second with largest population is Namibia, around 3,000. Others have 5, 10, and so forth and so forth. So it stands to reason, therefore, not stands to reason, it is actually understandable, natural, that we have people now focusing on South Africa, wanting to get hold of our rhino. The reason why we have this rhino, by the way, is because of the success story that South Africa is. We are a success story of nature conservation and conserving these species of ours in the best manner ever possible anywhere else than anywhere else. This is the reason why we have these high numbers. We are #1, one of the leading countries in conservation in general, not only in rhino. So people come to poach, we are fighting, and we will continue to fight. Fight those who are poaching. We are aware that we are facing the world syndicates, who, by the way, we know that they require the might, not only of South Africa, but of the whole world. And it is for that reason that in our measures that we have put in place as part of the fight, we have isolated one of the issues as fighting on an international world, working with other countries that are transit countries, working with countries that are user countries, that are rent state countries like we are, so that we cooperate and work together in fighting this battle, so that if people, for instance, like we are beginning to see that in South Africa, we are beginning to have a trend of going down. The poaching rate is going down, that trend. But it's increasing next door in Namibia. So it means, therefore, we've got to now say, we've got to stop them even from going next door. So it's that reason. And by the way, those who are poaching, when they get into the waters or into an aeroplane, they are out of South Africa's borders and area where we can do something. So we need some other bodies like IQUIC, which is a body consisting of your SARS, your revenue services of the world, not only South African, but also your Interpol, defense systems of the world. They work together. And that body is called the IQUIC, a combination of bodies of that nature. So we work through them and work with them to actually deal with this poaching issue. We also are fighting internationally to work with other user states in particular. For instance, we have a memorandum of understanding with several countries like Vietnam, China, Mozambique. We would be signing one soon with Kenya, with Botswana as a range states. Those last two are range states. So yes, the measures are quite enormous. We always brief South Africans about what we are doing with regards to those measures and in fighting through those measures. But yes, we will not relent. We want to ensure that the conservation success that South Africa is, we continue to be, and to carry through that and sustain that status of South Africa being one of the best of the world to conserve our rhino.
Now, there seems to be a divide between the African nations over the ivory trade. Nigeria, on one hand, has burnt a huge stock pile of ivory, seeking a ban, but other countries like Zimbabwe are saying that ivory trade should not be banned, as the money from the legal trade helps in conservation activity. What is your take on this issue?
We are a country, South Africa, that actually subscribe. Right in the Constitution of South Africa, it's written that we are a country that sustainably use our natural resources. So our policy is on sustainable utilization of our natural resources, meaning that we, in a space of rhino, for instance, all our game, all our animals, all our fauna and flora would allow trade as long as it doesn't help or it doesn't get our species to go extinct. And therefore, that means that our people must benefit. Not only those who have the commercial farmers, but even the previously disadvantaged must actually get to utilize these natural resources of ours. So our take in this regard is that if you want to sustain a natural resource like rhino, for instance, like elephant, what we need to do is to keep on applying the conservation methods that we are applying now. So the methods that we are applying are, amongst others, our management tools. So hunting is for us a management tool because you use hunting to get the weaker animals that are either old or weaklings or genetic pool that's not quite strong, not to just die naturally. By the time they are hunted and removed, they would not have multiplied with that kind of genetic pool having expanded in that particular space. So what we are doing, therefore, is to utilize hunting as a tool, a management tool. And therefore, as we hunt, some of the horns, for instance, do remain behind from natural causes. Some of the ivory, has to be saved and packaged away as the natural deaths also occur. Now, that's part of a resource of a country. And therefore, we do believe that strongly, as part of our sustainable utilization of our natural resources, we need to have everything else that's about a resource, a natural resource, utilized in a sustainable manner. So it's understandable when countries like Zimbabwe say the same thing like South Africa say, because just like we say South Africans must benefit, Zimbabweans also are saying some people must benefit, and some Zimbabweans must benefit, and many other end states on the continent, by the way. Those who ban, they also have a reason. We do understand their reasons. I have had a discussion with the minister from Uganda, for instance. She has had this to say to me. We are banning the ivory because, minister, we actually don't have ivory in Uganda. But we end up with ivory here with people just selling it in the community, and that dismantling the organization of our own country in little villages, because people now trade with these big things and they have syndicates amongst them, all of a sudden, and so forth and so forth. So we can't also confiscate this and save it somewhere, because to store it, you've got to pay huge monies to store it. And as a result, we are banning. Every country has got their own reason of banning. And it is for that reason that we as South Africa found it necessary, together with Namibia, to introduce a mechanism to data bank all our natural resources, be it ivory, be it rhino, horn, whatever, to data bank it, mark it, keep it as storage, ensure that it's actually recorded and registered in a register that's managed and audited every year, so that you don't end up in a country A having stock that you don't know where it comes from. That process has just unfolded. Now when we're at African Ministers' Council on Environment recently in Egypt, so it's going on. And we do think that it'll actually help us bear results.
All right. Thank you so much, Minister, for joining us. I actually learned a lot today. And as we know, it's World Environment Day. It's an annual event which is established by the United Nations General and the Assembly to educate and raise awareness on environmental conservative.